50 days in, and the Trump administration is still facing questions about former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. This comes as the Associated Press reports a lawyer for Flynn informed the president's transition team that Flynn might register with the government as a foreign agent. The report is now raising new questions about whether the president's team and later his White House lawyers fully vetted Flynn. Sean Spicer was asked about Flynn at Friday's briefing.
Are you saying the president was not aware that Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was acting as a foreign agent when he appointed him to be National Security Advisor?
Correct. Well, and just remember, you wouldn't know that until he filed. He didn't file till 2 days ago, so therefore nobody would have known that because he hadn't filed as a foreign agent until 2 days ago. What the AP is reporting, just so we're clear, is that a personal lawyer of General Flynn's contacted a transition lawyer and asked for guidance on what he should or should not do. The lawyer was instructed that that wasn't the role of the transition, and that it was up to the personal lawyer to work with the appropriate authorities or subject matter experts to determine what was appropriate and what was not appropriate in terms of filing. But this was a personal matter. It's a business matter. It's not something that would be appropriate for a government entity to give someone guidance on when they should file as an individual, as a private citizen.
Mark Leibovich is in Washington. He is the chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. Mark, good to see you.
Hi, Vlad. Good to be here.
I want to start with what you just heard there. Spicer attempted to downplay the matter. He said it's not up to the government to advise employees on personal matters like whether to register as a foreign agent. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thought is, I mean, yes, technically that's true, but I mean, the larger question is it up to the transition team, in this case, to do enough due diligence so that they know that the person they're nominating for one of the most sensitive jobs in the government is, in fact, whether he's filed as a foreign agent or not, or is enough working so closely with a foreign entity that such a conversation would have to take place. I mean, I think Spicer, this was kind of classic spin 101. I mean, you sort of turn it into a matter of filing the technical, whereas I think the larger crux of this is one of two things. One, did Mike Flynn mislead the transition team when he was up for this job? Or two, did Donald Trump and the team around him know all of this, and they just sort of figured it was either not a big deal or something they could get away with? So, I mean, I think the larger issue gets around, I mean, what did they know about who they were hiring and what his background was and how much due diligence went on well before this was an issue of filing.
All right, to be continued on that. Meanwhile, let's look ahead. The GOP's replacement bill, as you know, is going to the House Budget Committee next week. Will that third committee's work be more technical than substantive? How extensive will their changes likely be?
Well, I mean, I think they probably will be more so than the first two committees, which the bill did pass in the last 24 hours. I mean, I think the fact that it's a budget committee and this is ultimately going to be a budget issue and it's going to be scored by the Congressional Budget Office does sort of hit the rubber with the road here, which is that it's a fiscal issue, it's a cost issue, and I mean, there's going to be some fairly objective figures thrown out by the CBO and by the sort of the fiscal hawks in the House, many of whom sit on the Congressional Budget Committee. So I think that's a much bigger hill to climb in so much as there is one. If you were to sort of look at the three committees that were doing oversight on this in the House, that would probably be the big one. I think the other part of this is what will the CBO score say, the Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan entity, what will they say about the costs here, what the potential impact on the deficit is, and so forth.
All right. On Friday, the president and the vice president met with House chairmen involving the repealing of the Affordable Care Act after meeting with the top Republican lawmakers opposing the bill on Thursday. So is there any indication that these meetings are making a difference? The president and his supporters, the people who voted for him, have touted his negotiation expertise, the art of the deal, et cetera. Is a deal on the horizon?
You know, it's premature to say that. I mean, I think whether it's a negotiation or a deal-making mode or just a salesmanship mode, I mean, he seems clearly to have, at least in the last few days, once this thing kind of hit, been in a mode where he is a cheerleader. I wouldn't say he's taken full ownership of it because, there is still a bit of an arm's length on it, but he has been much more vocal, much more of a cheerleader, and certainly had a lot of people to the White House to talk, explicitly about this. So, whether it's having any effect, we'll see. I think it's still kind of early as far as the details being parsed here, especially around costs. It's also, very unclear. I mean, I'm obviously not in these meetings, how much in the weeds Donald Trump is getting on some of the details of this bill, or how much that the members that he's talking to actually care. So, look, I mean, I think it's probably a long, drawn-out dance. I think certainly the rollout of this has been pretty shaky as far as some of the initial reviews that it's gotten, especially from conservatives and a lot of the conservative press. But we'll see if this is a long game that they're playing, and certainly the idea that this got through 2 committees in the House, whether they're peripheral or not, is a good story for them, and it could be seen as a good start.
I want to drill down to a little bit of what you said, Mark, about the arm's length and the sort of the in the weeds with the president as far as the details of this bill is concerned. And you've covered Washington for a long time, so this is a question from somebody who has not. If the very conservative members of the House of Representatives do not get the sense from the President of the United States, look, this is the bill. The way we've heard from Paul Ryan, right? He's saying this is it. If the President is saying, well, I'm open to negotiation, or I'm open to making a deal, for example, on Medicaid, and they go back, is it their sense that, look, I don't necessarily have to vote for this bill because the President says he's willing to negotiate on some of the things that I feel very strongly about, that my constituents who put me in office, who are completely against the Affordable Care Act, put me in office for, right. So I'm going to take a pass.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question here is the loyalty of these constituents to repealing the Affordable Care Act and some of the fallout from it, if they don't like the bill, is that actually stronger or weaker than their actual loyalty to Donald Trump? I mean, I think maybe the more interesting phase of this is when Donald Trump actually goes on the road and maybe tries to sell this thing from a podium, whether somewhere around the country. And at that point, he'll probably take a more public ownership of it. But Trump might be hedging his bets a little bit. One, because it's not clear how sort of deeply invested he is into the details of this. But two, if it does fail, he can just say, well, this is a House issue, this is a business as usual issue, this is the Democrats' fault, this is Paul Ryan's fault. I mean, he certainly has not been averse to casting blame when it looks like things are not going to go his way. So, I mean, it could be any number of things that he's thinking about here. I don't know how deeply he's scheming on all this, but I do think that there's certainly a very, very strong core of support for Donald Trump, and these presumably would be the same people who support a lot of the conservatives who maybe were elected by the Tea Party a few years ago, who would have probably been anathema to something that costs this much.
Exactly. All right. So let me ask you about this. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi suggested that FBI Director James Comey should publicly dispute the president's wiretapping claims. Comey met with lawmakers on the Hill on Thursday. President Trump stayed quiet Friday when he was asked about the accusations. Where does that stand?
Jim Comey has sort of managed to find himself in the middle of all of these things. I mean, there have been a lot of reports this week that the FBI was very upset, particularly Comey was very upset with the reports over the weekend, or Donald Trump's tweets over the weekend, asked the Justice Department to sort of knock them down. There's been no statement forthcoming from the Justice Department. And what's tricky here is that Jim Comey is an independent entity, and so is the Justice Department theoretically, but obviously Jeff Sessions was appointed by Donald Trump, and it's his Justice Department now. So, I'm guessing that at this point, Jim Comey's probably not going to be swayed that much by Nancy Pelosi making a public recommendation on what he should or should not say. I also think it's pretty well known that his position on this is one of great unhappiness, and I think he probably, I assume there are a lot of conversations going on behind the scenes between him and the people he works with at Justice to see, what it is that they could do here. But again, it's unclear whether they're working at cross purposes here, whether the Justice Department is working in any way to protect the administration, and whether Comey is trying to get a lifeline here and maybe get a measure of independence where he can sort of pursue this on his own.
All right, Mark Leibovich of the New York Times Magazine. As always, we thank you.